The dress was wrong. That was the first thing Elara noticed. It was pale blue, long-sleeved, with small buttons along the cuffs that someone had chosen because it looked soft. Harmless. The kind of thing you put on a girl you were handing over and did not want anyone to look at twice. She wore it without complaint. The Great Hall of Wreath was cold in the way that old buildings are cold, not from the weather, but from something older than that, something the stone itself had absorbed over generations. The fire in the far hearth was going, but the heat did not reach the center of the room. It did not reach the long table where Elder Kael sat with his hands folded and his expression arranged into something that was supposed to look like dignity. Elara stood to his left. She had been standing for 20 minutes. She had not moved, had not shifted her weight, had not looked toward the door. She was very good at standing still. The envoy from King Aldric Kael's court arrived without announcement. There were 4 of them, 3 guards in dark travel coats and 1 man in clean gray wool who carried a leather satchel and wrote things down before they were said. He had the eyes of a man who had seen enough handovers to have stopped registering the faces of the people being handed. Elder Kael rose. He spoke the words that had been prepared. He called the arrangement a gesture of goodwill. He called Elara a ward, which was a word that meant something polite in a sentence and something else entirely in a room. He said she would be comfortable at the king's fortress in Kaelveth. He said it the way you say a thing you know is not true but that no one will challenge. The man in grey wool looked at Elara for exactly as long as it took him to write 3 words. Then he looked back at his paper. Elara watched the fire. She had known about this arrangement for 11 days. She had not been told. She had found it herself, in the way she found most things, quietly, with patience, by paying attention to the things people did not bother to hide because they did not think she was listening. She had overheard Kael talking to his second the night the deal was made. She had sat on the other side of a closed door in the dark and listened to her uncle trade her for a border promise and 2 seasons of safe passage through Eastern Pact territory. She had sat there for a long time after they stopped talking. Then she had gone back to her room, packed 4 things, sewn 1 of them into the lining of the gown she was now wearing, and begun to plan. The envoy's lead guard signaled that the papers had been confirmed. The man in grey wool closed his satchel. The transaction was complete. Kael put a hand briefly on Elara's shoulder as she passed him. He said something quiet about pride. She did not hear it. She was already counting the guards at the door. 2 outside. 1 by the hall's side exit. 1 who had stayed with the horses and had not come in. She had seen him through the high window when they arrived. He was positioned at the left flank of the courtyard, partially sheltered, with a clear view of the front gate. A good position. Thoughtful. Someone had trained him well. 14 total. That was how many stood between her and the outside world. She filed that away and walked through the door. The road to Kaelveth took 3 days. Elara sat in the transport carriage across from 2 of the guards, who did not speak to her except to offer water at the midday rest. The countryside ran flat and then rose slowly into hill country, and then the hills hardened into something older, darker, rocky ridgelines with pine growth that pressed close to the road and broke the light into long cold strips. She looked out the window most of the way. She was not seeing the view. She was memorizing the road. Kaelveth Fortress came into sight on the afternoon of the 3rd day, and her first thought was that it was larger than the intelligence she had built. She had found 2 written references to it, both old. Both underestimated the walls. The outer gate was flanked by towers with rotation guards. She counted the shift change as they entered, 12 minutes between each pass. The inner courtyard was enclosed on 3 sides by the main building, open on the north side to a stone walkway that connected to what looked like a barracks. 4 exits visible from where she sat in the carriage. There would be more she could not see yet. She had time. A woman named Grace met them in the inner hall. She was middle-aged, efficient, and spoke with the flat warmth of someone who had been assigned to care without being asked to feel. She walked Elara to a room in the east wing, explained the meal times, pointed out the bathing room down the hall, and left. Elara stood in the room for a moment. It was clean. The window overlooked the mountain line to the north. The door had a lock but no bolt on the inside, which was not a mistake, it was a design choice. Someone had considered whether guests in this wing should have the ability to keep others out, and had decided no. She went to the window. Opened it. Cold air came in. The drop to the courtyard below was about 15 feet. The walkway to the north was visible from this angle. She could see the barracks door, the rotation guard on the east tower, and 3/4 of the inner courtyard. Not a bad room, actually. She reached beneath the hem of her gown and found the small seam she had made in the lining. Worked it open with her thumbnail. The knife was compact, handle wrapped in dark cloth, blade slightly shorter than her forearm. She had carried it for 4 years. It was not decorative. She had made it herself from a broken tool, ground it down over 2 weeks, and balanced it until it sat perfectly in her grip. She set it on the windowsill. Sat beside it on the stone ledge. Looked at the mountain line. Looked at the inner courtyard. Looked at the barracks door. Said, very quietly, to the empty room, 14. Then she was still. Outside, the fortress sounds continued. Shift change in the east tower. A horse in the courtyard. Voices somewhere below, distant and indistinct. The wind off the mountain came through the open window and moved against her face. She let it. She had not come here because her uncle had sent her. She had come because this was the door that led to the room she needed to reach. She had chosen it the way a hunter chooses ground, not for comfort, not for safety, but for position. She would learn this place. She would learn its people. She would learn what lived inside these walls that should not be living there. And then she would decide what happened next. The knife sat on the sill with its blade facing outward, toward the mountain. She looked at it for a long moment. Left it there. Stood. Went to the basin in the corner and washed her hands. Changed out of the blue dress and into the plain dark clothes she had packed. Folded the dress carefully and set it on the chair by the door. She would not need it to look harmless anymore. She was already inside. The next morning, she came down to the hall for the first meal before anyone else. She sat at the far end of the long table, with her back to the wall, and watched the room fill. She had a good memory, the kind that did not require effort, that simply recorded faces, gaits, the way people moved when they were comfortable and the way they moved when they were being watched. She watched the household staff, the lower guards, the 2 advisors who came in late and sat together. She watched what people looked at when they entered a room, and what they deliberately avoided looking at. One of the guards by the east corridor looked at the south door every few minutes. Not checking. Something else. She noted that and ate her food and said nothing. By the end of the first week, she knew the names of 11 people in the fortress. Not because anyone had told her, but because she listened to the way people addressed each other, and remembered. She knew that the head of the household guard was a man named Owen, who had a knee injury he did not mention and walked through the pain with the careful step of someone who had decided not to show it. She knew that the king's lead council advisor was a man named Fletcher, who arrived to every meeting slightly early and left every meeting slightly late. She knew that the cook's assistant, a young woman named Claire, was sending letters home with the supply riders and that those letters were probably not reviewed. She knew 12 things she was not supposed to know. She was just beginning. On the 8th day, King Aldric Kael saw her for the first time since the hall in Vreth. She was crossing the inner courtyard, returning from what she told the gate guard was a walk for air. He had let her through without question. She had noted that too, who let her through, who hesitated, who checked. The king was standing near the north walkway, speaking with Commander Soren, who was the head of his personal security. Soren was a tall man with a very still face and the type of focused quiet that Elara recognized from experience. Not a soldier who had made peace with violence. A thinker who had learned it. She walked past without breaking stride. Did not look at the king directly. Peripheral only, enough to note his posture, his expression, the direction of his attention. He did not look at her either. She went back to the east wing. Sat at the window. Pulled out the small notebook she kept in the lining of her boot and added 3 lines in the shorthand she had developed herself over years of moving through places she was not supposed to be in. Then she looked at the mountain. 14 guards between her and the gate. That number had not changed. It did not need to. She was not going anywhere. The fortress ran on routine, and routine was what Elara trusted most. Routine meant patterns. Patterns meant gaps. And gaps, over time, meant everything. By the 3rd week she knew the east corridor went unwatched for 6 minutes between the 2nd and 3rd patrol rotation. She knew the council chamber was left unlocked for 40 minutes on mornings when Fletcher arrived early. She knew that 2 of the supply riders who came weekly through the north gate were not carrying only supplies. She had seen the 2nd rider pass something to the guard at the inner stable door. Small. Flat. Done in the middle of a conversation about weather, which was when most people hid things, inside the noise of the ordinary. She memorized the rider's face and let him leave. It was not time yet. She needed more names on the thread before she pulled it. On the 22nd day, Commander Soren spoke to her for the first time. He did not introduce himself. He appeared at the end of the east corridor while she was returning from the meal hall, and he simply fell into step beside her as though they had been walking together already. She kept her pace. Did not look at him directly. "You rise early," he said. "I sleep lightly," she said. "Most of the household doesn't come down before the 6th bell." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. She was aware of him measuring her the way a careful person measures something they have not categorized yet. "Do you need anything?" he asked. "For your room. Your stay." "No. You haven't asked for anything since you arrived." "I have everything I need." Another pause. They had reached the turn toward the east wing. She stopped. Looked at him directly for the first time in the conversation. Soren had gray eyes and a manner of looking at a person that gave very little back. She met it without adjustment. "I appreciate you checking," she said. Mild, finished. She turned and walked to her room. Behind her, she heard him stop walking. He stood there for a moment. She could tell by the absence of footsteps. Then he turned and went the other way. He was suspicious. That was fine. Suspicious people paid attention, and attention worked in all directions. She went to her window. Added 1 line to her notebook. Soren, watching. Good. On the 27th day, she found the first proof. She had been in the council chamber for 11 minutes before the morning session began. She was not supposed to be there, no one had told her she was not supposed to be there either, which was a gap she had been preserving carefully. Fletcher arrived early to every session. What Fletcher did in those minutes before anyone else came in was something she had needed to see for herself. He went to the map on the far wall. Not to look at it. To reach behind the lower right corner where the frame sat loose against the stone. He removed something. Read it quickly. Put it back. Then he went to his seat and arranged his papers and waited. Elara had watched from behind the partial door of the adjoining storage room, which was unlocked because the key was kept on a hook 3 doors away and no one thought the room mattered. She waited until Fletcher was fully settled. Then she eased the door back to where she had found it and left through the servants' exit at the far end. She did not go to the map. Not yet. She did not need what was behind it. She needed to know that something was there, and she needed to know who put it there, and she needed the name above Fletcher's in the chain. She was 1 level up from the bottom. 2 levels below the top. She went to the kitchen for her meal. Sat with Claire and the other household staff. Listened to the conversation about the coming cold snap and whether the root stores were deep enough and who had seen the northern lights the night before last. She said very little. She laughed once at something Claire said, which was genuine, because Claire was funny. She helped clear the table afterward, which no one had asked her to do. She was easy to forget. She preferred it. That afternoon, she stood in the outer courtyard during the brief window when the East Tower rotation overlapped with the gate change. She used those 4 minutes to observe the North stables. The second supply rider was back. 2 weeks early. She watched him from the far side of the courtyard, angle casual, attention elsewhere. Watched the handoff at the stable door. Different guard this time. The item was the same shape, same size. Same method, inside a sentence, inside normalcy. She looked at the guard's face. She did not know that one yet. She would. On the 31st day, she found the connection between the guard and Fletcher. It was a name, spoken once, carelessly, in the corridor outside the map room, by a man who assumed the hall was empty. It was not empty. She had been standing very still in the shadow of the storage room entrance, in the dark, in the cold, for a long time. Because that was what the work required. Standing in the dark and being patient and letting the world move around you until it showed you what you were waiting for. The name was Aldric. Not the king. A different Aldric, one she had not heard before, which meant he was not part of the visible structure of the fortress. Someone outside. Someone who had no name in any of the papers she had been able to read or any conversation she had heard in a month. A name with no face yet. She went back to her room. Added it to the notebook. Sat at the window. The knife was still on the sill with its blade facing the mountain. She thought about turning it. Not yet. She needed the face to go with the name. And she needed 2 more pieces before the picture was complete. The work was not finished. It had barely started. Outside, the fortress breathed its slow routine. Shift change in the East Tower. A horse in the inner courtyard. Wind off the mountain, cold and clean and carrying nothing. She sat with it. She had all the time she needed. On the 35th day, a man arrived at the fortress with the supply convoy who was not a supply worker. Elara clocked him in the outer courtyard within 40 seconds of his arrival. He was dressed correctly for the part, worn coat, travel-tired posture, the kind of face people looked past without trying. But his eyes were working. Not tired. Scanning. He covered it well, moved it through the motions of a man checking his load, but the pattern was wrong. Too systematic. Too complete. She knew that pattern. She used it herself. She kept her distance. Kept her angle casual. Watched him work the courtyard, watched him register exits, watched him note the guard positions without appearing to. He was good. She was better. She watched him for 20 minutes across 3 different sightlines without moving from the spot she had chosen, which was partially obscured by the corner of the stable block and invisible from the north walkway. He never once looked in her direction. She had chosen the spot for that reason. She did not do anything. She filed his face, his gait, his method, and she let him move into the fortress with the rest of the convoy. That evening, she sat in her room and thought. He was not there to steal. The positions he had been memorizing were too specific for a thief. He was not part of the Fletcher chain, his attention had gone to the wrong areas, the living areas rather than the political ones. He was looking at access points to the personal quarters. She did not know who he was working for yet. But she knew what he was planning to do. The king's personal guard rotated at the 3rd bell. The corridor outside the king's private rooms was covered by 2 guards who changed every 4 hours except for a brief window when the inner rotation sometimes ran long and the outer stayed in position, creating a gap of roughly 90 seconds. That gap was not widely known. But it was findable, If you were patient enough and paid attention to the right things. She thought about that for a long time. Then she got up, put her boots on, and went to find him. It took her 22 minutes to locate him. He had taken a room in the West Wing, which was the overflow quarters for convoy staff and was, by design, minimally supervised. She stood outside the door for a moment. Listened. Single occupant. No movement. She did not knock. She sat down with her back against the wall beside his door, in the dark, and waited. At the second bell, he came out. He turned right toward the main corridor. She set his attention before he heard her, the way someone's posture changes a fraction of a second before a sound reaches them. He turned. She was standing. Arms at her side. Knife in her right hand, held low. She said one thing to him, quietly, without performance. He looked at her for a long moment. Then at the knife. Then back at her face. Whatever he had expected to find in this fortress, it was not her. She could see him recalibrating. She gave him time to finish. Then she told him what was going to happen. He did not argue. That was the part she respected about professionals. They understood the shape of a situation quickly. He understood the shape of this one. He stood very still while she told him what she needed him to carry back to whoever had sent him, and what would happen if that message was not delivered accurately. He said he understood. She believed him. She put the knife away. Stepped back. He left at first light with the convoy. She watched him go from the East Tower level, which she had accessed through the storage corridor and had been planning to access for 2 weeks against exactly this kind of need. 2 days later, a message arrived at the fortress gates. Not addressed to anyone. Delivered with the morning bread from the village trader, tucked into the basket. It read 4 words, "Send someone better." It was not signed. Elara found it because she had told the gate guard, the young one, Owen's nephew, who was earnest and easy to read, to bring her anything unusual that arrived without a name. She had done it casually, 3 days before, framed as concern about the household, and he had agreed without thinking much of it. He brought it to her at the breakfast table. She read it. Set it down. Poured herself more tea. It was, she thought, a reasonable message. She had sent the same idea in fewer words. She finished her breakfast and went back to work. The map room was her priority now. She had enough of the lower chain. She needed what was behind the frame, and she needed it without Fletcher knowing she had touched it. She went on the morning of the 39th day, during the window she had been protecting. 11 minutes. Fletcher was in the outer hall speaking with Owen about the store inventory, which was a conversation she had started the night before by mentioning to Claire that the figures from last month seemed low. She was not proud of it. But it was effective. She went to the map. Found the corner of the frame. Reached behind it. A folded paper. Small. Written in 2 hands. She read it once. Replaced it exactly as she had found it. Left through the servant's exit. She went to her room. Sat at the window. Outside, the morning light was coming in flat and cold off the mountain. She had the names now. All of them. 3 people inside the fortress and 2 outside, and the structure of what they were planning, and the timeline. The timeline was the part that required speed. She had 4 days. She opened the notebook. Read back through 5 weeks of notations. Then she turned to a clean page and began writing. Not notes this time. A list. She wrote 3 names at the top of the page. Then she wrote the king's name at the bottom. She looked at both for a moment. Then she picked up the knife from the windowsill, slid it back into the sheath at her forearm, and stood up. It was time to have a conversation she had been preparing for 5 weeks. She went to find Soren. She did not knock on his office door either. She simply opened it and walked in. He was at his desk. He looked up. He did not reach for anything. He simply looked at her with those steady gray eyes and waited. She closed the door behind her. Sat down across from him. "I need 20 minutes, she said. "For what?" "To give you the next 3 days before they go wrong." He was quiet for a moment. "Sit," he said, and then realized she already was. Something almost moved across his face. She placed the notebook on his desk, open to the list. He looked at it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. She held his gaze. "How long?" he said. "Since the second week." He was quiet again. She could see him moving through it, not resisting, not denying, just processing. He was good at that. She had thought he would be. "The map room," he said finally. It was not a question. "Yes. Fletcher. And 2 others. The names are on the second page." He turned the page. "Read it." His expression did not change. But something in his shoulders did, a slight settling, like a man who has been carrying a weight in the wrong position and has just been shown the right one. "What do you need from me?" he said. She told him. He did not argue. He did not ask her who she was or where she had come from or how she knew how to do what she had clearly been doing for 5 weeks inside a fortress she had arrived at in a dress with small buttons. He asked only practical questions. Good ones. She answered all of them. At the end, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The king needs to hear this." "I know," she said. "Tonight." "Yes. He's going to have questions." "He is," she said. "Tell him to wait until I've finished speaking before he asks them." Soren looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I'll tell him." She picked up the notebook. Stood. "One more thing," she said. "Yes. He asked me once if I hunt." Soren said nothing. "I told him no." She paused at the door. "He should know I was lying." She left. Behind her, she heard Soren sit very still for a moment. Then she heard him reach for his pen. She went back to her room for the last time as a ward of the East Wing. She stood at the window. Looked at the mountain. Looked at the inner courtyard. Looked at the north walkway and the barracks door and the shift change on the east tower. She picked up the knife from the sill. Turned it once in her hand. Set it down again. Blade facing inward now, toward the room. The door behind her, when she left open. The meeting with King Aldric Kael happened at the 9th bell in his private study, which was nothing like what she had expected. It was smaller. The fire in it was larger. The bookshelves were not decorative, the spines were worn at different rates, some of them broken and retaped, the kind of damage that came from reading, not from display. She noticed that. He was already in the room when Soren brought her in. He stood when she entered. She noted that too. He was taller than she had registered in the courtyard. Not dramatically enough. He had dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that were currently doing the same careful measuring she had seen in Soren, but less trained at concealing it. He was not a man who often had to hide what he was thinking, she judged. Because most people did not look at him long enough to read him. She was looking. He gestured to the chair across from his own. She sat. He sat. Soren stood by the door. The king looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the notebook Soren had placed on the desk between them. Then back at her. He said, "How much of this can you prove?" "All of it," she said. "When did you start?" "Day 8. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, he was past that. Something else. Something closer to recalibration. The map room. Fletcher uses it as a dead drop. Has been for at least 6 weeks, based on what I found. Likely longer. The writer. Not part of Fletcher's chain. Separate operation. Same goal, access to this level of the fortress and the council records. Two different parties who do not appear to know about each other. That's the dangerous part. One you might have caught eventually. Two you would not have. He was quiet. His hands were flat on the desk, still, the way Soren's hands went still when he was thinking hard. Why didn't you come to me sooner, he said. Because I needed all the names, she said. Partial information stops one person. Complete information ends the network. And now you have it. Now I have it. He looked at the notebook again. He opened it to the list she had made, the 3 names at the top, his at the bottom. He looked at it for a long moment. You wrote my name at the bottom, he said. Yes. Why? Because that's where you are in the structure, she said. Not in theirs. In mine. The purpose of all of it is to protect you. You're at the end of the line. He looked at her. She held it. What are you? He said. She had been waiting for that question. She had been waiting for it since the day she arrived. She said, "What would you like me to be?" It was not deflection. It was a genuine question. She was watching to see what he reached for. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, "Something I can actually use." She nodded once. Then let's talk about the next 4 days, she said. Soren moved away from the door. Came to the desk. Placed a second chair beside her without being asked. Sat down. The 3 of them leaned over the notebook in the firelight, and Elara began. Outside, the fortress went on with its routine. Shift change in the east tower. Wind off the mountain. The quiet, deep dark of a place that did not know yet what was about to happen inside it. Inside the king's study, 3 people who were now on the same side began the work. The names on the list were Owen's nephew, Fletcher, and a senior guard whose name was Colin, a man with 11 years in the fortress, a clean record, and a debt that had grown large enough to change what he was willing to do. Elara had found Colin through the angles. Wounds tell stories, and so does the way a person moves when they know something is going to happen in a place they are responsible for. Colin had begun taking a specific position on his patrol rotation 2 weeks ago that placed him away from the council wing at the exact time that would matter. Not obviously. Not enough for anyone tracking the standard rotation to flag. But enough for someone who had been watching the patrol for a month. She had not put his name on the list until she was certain. Soren confirmed it within an hour of the meeting. He had his own methods. They compared notes without competition, which was efficient and also told Elara something useful about Soren. He was not the kind of man who needed to be right more than he needed to be correct. She found that she respected that. The plan they built over the next 2 hours was not complicated. The best plans rarely were. Fletcher would be allowed to retrieve the message from the map room the following morning as usual. The message would have been replaced with one Elara had drafted, which confirmed the timeline and specified a meeting point. That meeting point would be inside the fortress rather than outside it, which was a change that would concern whoever was reading it at the other end, but concern was useful. Concerned people made small decisions quickly and sometimes poorly. Colin would be offered a different kind of choice. Not an arrest. A conversation, alone, away from anyone who could report what he said. Soren would conduct it, because Colin was a soldier and Soren understood how soldiers thought when they were backed into a position they had not meant to end up in. Owen's nephew, a young man named Gareth, 18 years old and in his first rotation, had not known what he was carrying. That was clear from the way he moved, the way he spoke, the complete absence of the particular tension that comes with knowing you are doing something wrong. Someone had used him without his awareness. That required a different handling entirely. Elara had written a note on his page of the notebook, not a target. A resource. Soren had read it and nodded. The outside connection, the name from behind the frame, the person who was neither Fletcher nor Colin but above them both, was the piece they did not yet have physical hold of. But Elara had the letter. And the letter, she had explained, had enough in it to establish origin if they knew where to look. The king had asked how she knew where to look. She had told him. He had asked no follow-up question. She noted that he was good at knowing when he was receiving an answer that was complete and when he was receiving one that was partial. He did not push for more than what was given. That was a quality she had not expected to find. She was revising her picture of him. On the morning of the 41st day, everything moved. Fletcher went to the map room. Retrieved the message. Sent his response through Gareth, who was told to deliver it to the North Rider and who did so without suspicion because he had done it before and had never been told it was unusual. The North Rider carried it out the gate. And into the hands of two of Soren's people who had been placed on the road since before dawn. Colin was brought to a quiet room in the barracks by Soren at the midday bell. What happened in that room took 40 minutes. When Soren came out, he had 3 additional names and a timeline that was even tighter than Elara had estimated. He came to find her in the courtyard where she was standing in the thin afternoon sun with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the north gate. He told her the timeline. She said, "Tonight." "Yes." "Then we move now." "Yes," he said again. She went to her room. Stood at the window for exactly as long as it took her to think through the 3 things that could still go wrong and the adjustments that addressed each of them. Then she put her boots on, took the knife from the sill, slid it into the sheath at her forearm, and went to find the king. He was in the study. She knocked this time. He said, "Come in." She came in. Told him. 5 sentences. The shape of the night. He listened. Said nothing while she spoke. When she finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" "Stay in this room," she said. "Until Soren or I come to you." "Not a guard. Not a staff member. One of us." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said. She turned to leave. "Elara," he said. She stopped. Looked back. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not measuring this time. Not calculating. Something more direct than either of those. "Be careful," he said. She held it for a moment. "I am always careful," she said. She went. What happened that night is the kind of thing that sounds simple when told afterward and is not simple when it is happening. 3 people were removed from the fortress in an operation so clean and so quiet that the main household staff did not know until morning. No violence. No raised voices. The right doors in the right sequence and the right words in the right rooms and the right people in the right positions. Elara was at the center of none of it visibly. She was at the center of all of it structurally. Fletcher was taken from his room at the second bell. Colin was already in a secure room. Gareth sat in the kitchen with Claire, neither of them knowing what was happening 3 corridors away, and Gareth would not be told until morning, when he would have to understand things that would be difficult to understand. The outside connection, the man whose name had been on the folded paper behind the map-room frame, was brought in through the north gate before dawn. Soren's people had done that part with the same precision that Elara recognized as the result of good training applied to a good plan. She stood in the outer courtyard when they brought him through. Watched from a distance. Confirmed the face matched what she had been given. It did. She went back inside. By the time the morning bell rang, the work was finished. She went to the east wing. Stood at the window. The knife was still on the sill. Still turned inward. She looked at the mountain line. The light was coming up flat and pale behind it, cold and slow, the way winter mornings came in this part of the country. She thought about what she had come here to do. She thought about what was done. She thought about the door. Behind her, the room was quiet and orderly and cold. She had never made it feel like hers, had never put anything on the walls, had never moved the furniture, had never built anything in it that would need to be dismantled when she left. She had not known whether she was going to leave. She still did not know. She stood at the window until the household began to stir and the morning sounds she knew well by now, the kitchen, the courtyard, the East Tower shift change, started up their familiar rhythms. Then she heard a knock on her open door. Soren. He looked tired in the way that people who have worked through a night look tired, not broken, just worn around the edges. He stood in the doorway. "It's done," he said. "I know. The king wants to see you." "I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at the window, at the knife on the sill, at the mountain. "You could have left," he said. "Last night, in the middle of it. You had at least 3 moments." "I know." "You didn't." She looked at him. "No." He nodded, once, slowly. Not a question. Not even really an observation. Just an acknowledgement of a fact he had just finished deciding was a fact. "The king's study," he said. "When you're ready." He left. She looked at the mountain for another moment. Picked up the knife. Turned it once in her hand. Set it down with the blade facing the room. Then she walked to the study. The king was standing when she came in. He had not sat down yet. He had the look of a man who had been awake most of the night and had not bothered to pretend otherwise. There were 2 cups of something warm on his desk. He gestured to one. She took it. Sat down. He sat across from her. "It's over," he said. "This part of it," she said. He nodded. He understood that. She could see it. "What do you want?" he said. "Not what are your terms. Not what do you expect. What do you want?" The phrasing mattered. She looked at the cup in her hands. "There are other fortresses," she said. "Other councils with things growing in them that should not be there. Other chains that run too long without anyone pulling them." He was quiet. "I'm good at finding them," she said. "Better than what you have. Better than most of what anyone has. I know that now." "I don't want a title," she said. "I don't want ceremony. I want authority. My own chain of access. My own methods. Accountability to you and Soren and no one below that." He looked at her for a long moment. "That is not a small thing to ask for," he said. "No," she agreed. "You're not going to make it easier by asking for less." "No," she said again. He was quiet for a moment. Looked at the desk. Looked at the notebook, which was still there. Looked back at her. "All right," he said. She held the warmth of the cup in both hands. "There's one more thing," he said. She waited. "My uncle," she said. He looked at her. "Kane," she said. "He will come here eventually. To renegotiate the border arrangement. To see what his bargain produced. And? Let him come," she said. "Do not tell him anything before he arrives. Let him walk into whatever room I'm in and figure out what he is looking at." Something moved across the king's face then. Not amusement exactly. Closer to recognition, the look of someone who has just understood the full shape of a thing they had only seen part of before. "Done," he said. She nodded. Set down the cup. Stood. "I'll start with the Southern correspondence records," she said. "There are patterns in the last 3 months of Fletcher's documents that suggest the connection goes further than one network. I need 3 days with the archive. You have it." She moved to the door. "Elara." She stopped. "The first day you arrived," he said. "In that hall in Vreth. You stood there and let Kane hand you over and you said nothing. You didn't look angry. You didn't look frightened." He paused. "You looked like someone waiting for a starting signal." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I was," she said. She left. The corridor outside the study was quiet. Morning light coming through the high north windows, pale and clean. She walked the familiar path back toward the east wing, noting as she always did the guard positions, the sound from the courtyard, the shift change on the east tower. All of it familiar now. All of it known. She went to her room for the last time. It would be only a room. She stood at the window. Picked up the knife. Slid it into the sheath. Left the window open. Left the door open. Stood in the middle of the room for a moment, looking at the mountain. She thought about the night she had arrived. The 14 guards. The east wing. The dress with its small harmless buttons and the knife sewn into the lining and the long, cold look out this window at the shape of a place she had chosen to walk into. She had been handed to this fortress like something without weight. She was leaving it as the person who decided what was carried through its walls and what was not. She had come here through a door someone else thought they had opened for her. The door she was building now was entirely her own. She turned away from the window and walked out. Behind her, the room was empty. The window was open. The mountain was there. Elder Kael arrived at Kael 11 days later, on a grey morning with a cold wind coming off the ridgeline. He came with 4 men and a prepared speech and the expression of a person who expected to be received with a certain amount of gratitude. He was received at the inner gate by a household steward who asked him to wait in the east corridor. He waited for 7 minutes. Then the door at the far end of the corridor opened. Elara came through it. She was not wearing the blue dress. She was in plain dark clothes, a long coat, her hair back. She walked the way she always walked, unhurried, quiet, with the particular kind of attention that only registers as unusual once you have seen it a few times. Behind her, at a slight distance, Soren Kael opened his mouth. Closed it. His eyes moved from her to the space around her, to the deference in Soren's posture, to the way the 2 guards on either side of the corridor stood with the kind of readiness that came from taking their cues from the woman in the center of the room. He did the arithmetic. His mouth stayed closed. Elara walked to within 3 paces of him and stopped. She looked at him. He looked back. He was a man who had made many transactions in his life. She could see him trying to locate this one on a map he already had, and failing. She let him fail. Then she said, quietly and without ceremony, "The council is in session in 20 minutes. I will have someone show you to the waiting room." She held his gaze for one more moment. Long enough for him to understand that the waiting room was not a temporary courtesy. It was a position. Then she walked past him. Behind her, she heard him breathe. She kept walking. The king was already in the council chamber when she arrived. He was standing at the head of the table. 2 advisors were seated. Soren came in behind her and took his position by the door. She went to the seat beside the king's, not across from it. Beside it. She sat. The map from the wall of the council chamber had been replaced 2 days ago with a newer one she had corrected from the archive, which had contained 3 territorial markings that were out of date and one that had never been accurate. She pulled out the notebook. Opened it to a clean page. The king sat. He did not look at her. She did not look at him. They were past that kind of punctuation. They understood each other now the way 2 people understand each other when they have worked through something real together and come out with the same shape on the other side. The session began. Elara wrote the first line of the day's notes. Outside the council chamber, the fortress moved through its rhythms, guards, kitchens, courtyards, the east tower with its shift change, the mountain wind coming down cold and straight from the north. It was all known to her now. All mapped. And somewhere in the Southern Archive, in 3 months of correspondence she had not yet finished reading, the next thread was waiting. She was already pulling it.